Hi there, my name is Christine Wise, and this is my Module 12 case study final project presentation. So this case study, it outlines the ethical dilemma of copyright law and the differing of opinions between the school librarian and a third grade teacher involving some copied CDs of a software program that was purchased by the third grade teacher. So, who is in this case study? We have Mr. Sample. He is principal. It is his third year at St. Regis School, and he is not from the area. So, he worked really hard to really develop relationships and is finally in a really good place with his staff. Mrs. Lynn is the library specialist, but also serves as the computer lab kind of organizer. So she does that position, and she is the one who did copy the CDs for teachers in the building. Mrs. Brandon is a third grade teacher. Um, and she is new to St. Regis School. She has taught for a couple years, but it was at a different school. So she's kind of also coming in as an outsider and a newbie. Mrs. Williams is a third grade teacher, and she has been there for a while. And she works with Mrs. Brandon. There's only two teachers per grade level. The PTA is involved. The president, Mrs. Evans, actually, she helped and assisted Mrs. Lynn in copying the CDs and resources for the teachers. And this all occurred at St. Regis School. Grades are K through 8, and there are 420 students in the building as a whole. It's a relatively small school. So, what happened? So, St. Regis School has really been focusing on a curriculum push of involving computers and technology and resources for students and their success for teachers to have and incorporate in their teaching. And so, the way they've been doing that and funding it is through a very small budget that they receive from the state. And then most of the money is coming from the PTA funding. They have two pretty big fundraisers a year that provide money to teachers that they get allocated to purchase what they need for their classroom. But again, the push has been around technology and computers. Mrs. Lynn is the media specialist, but like I said, she also serves as kind of the computer lab organizer, teacher, if you will. And so, what happened is that she was requested by teachers in the building to make copies of a software program that had originally been purchased by Mrs. Williams and Mrs. Brandon with their allocated funding. And they wanted to also utilize those resources with their students. Mrs. Brandon, who is the one who is new to the school this year, she is very concerned about copyright law violations after receiving the copies of the software. And she came from a school where copyright law was, it was definitely something that was like discussed, and she felt really knowledgeable about, and that it was definitely part of their policy to not do that. So she was having a very hard time with the fact that this had been done. Other teachers are actually really happy to have the resources, and as far as we know, no one else voiced a concern with the copyright. Mrs. Williams, the other third grade teacher, was also happy to have the resources. So Mrs. Lynn, she does defend her choices because what she said is that this really was done to provide additional resources and supports for the success of the students, to promote learning and to follow that initiative and that push of the curriculum focus of technology and incorporating more of that into St. Regis School. And that simply funding just isn't there. So she was trying to be creative and resourceful. So Mrs. Brandon, she approaches the principal, Mr. Sample, after she had tried to discuss with Mrs. Lynn her concerns, and that was not well received. So she then approaches Mr. Sample. So overall, a violation of copyright law is unethical and it is against the law. So pretty clear cut. No physical harm was done. Um, contravenes of copyright law definitely happened, and the breach of the software licensing the contract. So that's part of the agreement when you purchase something. It regulates policies to make sure that copies are not reproduced, multiple copies, and then shared without the author's permission. And so that, of course, is exactly what happened and is what Mrs. Lynn did. Even though there's going to be benefit for so many students to have access to these resources, the overall ethical and moral decision to not violate copyright law, even though someone might not know about it, that's really what is going on here. It doesn't make it right. There's no harassment or discriminatory incident in this case. So my one sentence, synthesizing the situation: the St. Regis School has violated copyright law and the software license contract with the computer software they purchased when the library specialist reproduced multiple copies of the software program for teacher use, ultimately forcing Mr. Sample to rectify the situation in order to adhere to copyright policies and regulations while ensuring student and adult success. All right, so back to the facts. Let's review those. So, people in this case study. So, like I said, we have Mr. Sample. He is the principal, and I will be making decisions acting as Mr. Sample. This is his third year with St. Regis School, and his relationships with his staff are very important. It's something he's invested a lot of energy into. Mrs. Brandon is the third grade teacher with the concerns of copyright law and that violation. Mrs. Williams, the other third grade teacher, she was in support, I guess you could say, but also she had voiced no concern. She was fine with receiving those resources. Mrs. Lynn is the media specialist who, per the teacher's request, she did copy the software and distribute it. Mrs. Evans, who is the PTA president, so she's very involved in the school, funding different things for the school and just partnering together for the best of students and staff. She actually did help Mrs. Lynn in the copying of the software. St. Regis teachers are involved. That we didn't get any of their names, but they're definitely part of it. All of the students, and then parents and families. And what I noted about St. Regis School is that it seemed like I was kind of picking up from the information that many of the teachers have been around and been there for a while, and then there aren't really a lot of newer outside people. So the place. So this is a very small rural town. It's 25 minutes outside of the closest largest city. They have one grocery store, one drugstore, and a couple little shops to kind of keep them going. Otherwise, they have to go to a large city. There are only 420 students altogether for a kindergarten through 8th grade building. And they did note that the high school students, they actually get bused to the large city every day. I kind of took from just the information giving the dynamics of the school and just the information given, and then also the way that they receive funding. I believe that this is a public school, although that information was not given to us. And then finally, the program itself. So, sorry, I'm trying to move this here. It is, like I said, it is a K-8 building. There are 2 teachers per grade level, so relatively small. There are actually only 2 special ed teachers for the entire building. So one covers the early childhood grades, and then the other teacher does the upper elementary. Like I said, I took this to be a public school from the information that I read from the case study. Finances, so the way that the school receives money and funding is, like I mentioned, just a small amount from the state, and then the PTA does give them the largest portion of funding from 2 really big fundraisers. And their focus was this curriculum push of investing in technology for students. So reviewing and prioritizing the information that we have from the case study. So the situation and conflict is damaging to many stakeholders that are involved. So it really affects everyone. Mrs. Lynn and the St. Regis School and Mr. Sample, they are all liable, Mrs. Evans as well, for participating in the copyright, distributing it, and that it happened in Mr. Sample's building and in that district. So sadly, it's sad that students and teachers are going to lose this resource. And that is always difficult. However, it was done in an unethical way that broke the law, and that is never going to trump the resource that teachers and students would gain. So ultimately, what the school and Mr. Sample needs to do is just be creative in how to maybe find free resources that are similar. So also the PTA is involved. So Mrs. Evans, like I said, she did support and help Mrs. Lynn copy the CDs. It also could have effect on the overall trust of the PTA, could have some damage done to that relationship. So Mr. Sample, sadly for him, he has invested so much in creating a positive climate and culture and really connecting with his teachers. And this will definitely have, however it is handled, this will definitely have an effect on the staff and his rapport. There will be either some upset individuals that the resources are taken from them, or there will be people that are upset that there's nothing done about copyright law. So it's definitely a lose-lose for him in terms of that aspect. And then the relationship for Mrs. Brandon and Mrs. Lynn, that they have these differing, very strong opinions about how this was handled. So that will be difficult for the two of them. All stakeholders have yet to be communicated with and about the situation. So the superintendent, the school board, the PTA, teachers using the resource, the community, none of these people know that this is an issue and that this is a problem. Investigating the software program's licensing information, it could be helpful and beneficial in this case, but it's not necessary because given all the facts and analyzing and evaluating the situation, it is very clearly a violation of copyright law and regulations. Okay, so section 6, options and consequences. So how could we handle this situation? So thinking as myself, I am the acting principal and Mr. Sample. Here are a couple different options that I came up with, and then I will give you the consequences that could be followed by those. So first, take no action, allow for the use of the materials, but discourage violating policies and laws in the future. So this is very clearly unethical, and it's a violation of copyright law. So if nothing is done about it, then you're ultimately promoting it. Even if you kind of follow it up with, don't do it again in the future. A negative effect on the staff climate and culture. The problem is present, and that is going to affect people no matter how it's handled. And then also impacting the relationship with Mrs. Brandon. If nothing's done and she voiced a big concern about this, then that will have a negative effect on that relationship. Option number 2, allow for the use of the materials and applaud Mrs. Lynn for creating equity for the resource among the staff and students. So you really could, you can see and like want to cheer for Mrs. Lynn and that she is really trying to just make this resource available to all students for the promotion of their learning. And I get that, and I love that for her. But again, there are some consequences that go with that. So definitely breach of the licensing contract. Cannot copy things without the author's permission. Not upholding the responsibility to follow copyright laws and procedures. A major disruption to staff morale. So there will be conflict and problem because Mrs. Brandon very clearly feels one way, and she very well might not be the only teacher that feels that way. So there will be definitely issue and conflict there. And just ultimately, it is unethical and illegal. Number 3 option, collect copied materials and give consequences to Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Evans. So this one I just kept really simple. I would handle it myself and provide them consequences and just remove the resource. So Sadly, the students, they definitely lose out, and the teachers as well, because they're going to lose that resource. It will definitely isolate Mrs. Lynn, and it will discourage that passion she has to promote student learning and success and be creative in that way and try to get everyone access to those materials. That's an amazing quality, but definitely it needs to be done in an ethical way that is following policies and procedures. Loss of trust with the PTA and just how the situation is handled. Mrs. Evans very clearly supported this action, so I think there will be some issue with that as well. Overall, just disgruntled teachers for losing the resource, and then again, effects on the staff climate. Okay, so option number 4, seek out all stakeholders to inform them of the situation, which yet had to be done, hadn't been done yet. Formulate and implement a plan of action together. So working together, collaborating together. Consequences of that, ultimately, my personal leadership abilities could be questioned, and that, why am I not handling this myself? It's my building. I'm responsible for that. Too many cooks in the kitchen, possibly you're getting too many opinions, and maybe just it would be hard to land on an appropriate way to take action in this situation. Loss of trust with Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Evans and staff members. And then possible legal action could be taken by the software company. Number 5, inform teachers of the situation and copyright violation and allow them to choose if they want to use the resource based on their comfort level. So this definitely has some consequences, because it would violate Mrs. Lynn's privacy in bringing attention to that this was done and then saying, I know that it was wrong. However, you can choose to do what you want with it. It's ultimately promoting the violation of the law. It's going to create conflict among the staff and divide them, because some people might feel like it's fine to use the resources while others are very uncomfortable with it. And then again, that, big thing, students first, is that it's going to create an equity gap among the students in the building if not every teacher has access to deliver that resource to their students. So ultimately, that is wrong as well. Number 6, communicate to staff members of copyright laws, policies, and the current situation. Include stakeholders in formulating a fair and equitable plan moving forward, and immediately collect copied materials. So consequences of this, again, that effect on the staff climate, morale, it'll definitely be affected. It will probably have some embarrassment factor for Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Evans, and that this was done, and now there's a great deal of attention being brought to it for the whole staff to know, the PTA, the Board of Education, the community possibly. Again, that loss of resource to students and teachers. You might be looking at some parent complaints because their child had access to this wonderful resource, and now all of a sudden they don't. So that could be a problem. And then again, possible legal consequences from the software company. So looking at evaluating the options, but this time thinking about the pros and the benefits. So I kind of already hit the consequences. So in this part, I'm just going to focus on the pros. And you can see that I have the choice, the option, and then in the middle, I added the pro, and then all the way on the right is the consequence, which is the same as what was just shared on the previous slide. So number 1, taking no action. So allowing for the use of the materials, but discouraging violating laws in the future. What pro is there for this? So it allows for students and teachers to continue to benefit from the resources. And I did deliver and communicate a reminder to not do it again in the future. So pros. Option number 2, allow for the use of the materials and applaud Mrs. Lynn for creating equity for the resource among the students and staff. So pros to that, allowing for students and teachers to benefit from the resource, providing equity. It'll make Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Evans feel really good that they did something great for the students and staff. It also supports the issue they have of just a lack of funding for their school. So it helps problem solve that. And it would also get the approval of the PTA president, Mrs. Evans, which is important. That relationship is very vital to the success and the funding of the school. Option number 3, collect copied materials and give consequences to Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Evans and just solely handle it myself. So pros of that is that it is showing that support of Mrs. Brandon, the teacher who had question and concern of what had taken place. It also implements copyright law for the school and making sure that we're adhering to that. It is the ethical choice to collect the materials and remove that resource since it was distributed and copied illegally. And then, again, so important, just student first, remembering that everything we do, we're setting an example for our students. So we have to teach them about copyright law, but we also have to model it and following it. All right, option number 4, pros for that. Seek out all stakeholders to inform them of the situation and formulate and implement a plan of action together. So pros, this includes the important stakeholders. So many people are affected by this situation, and it's important that they are aware of it and that they can also collaborate and make decisions together with myself, Mr. Sample, me, the principal, to figure out how to effectively handle the situation. And then it protects the well-being of students and staff and just making sure that we're adhering to copyright law. Number 5, inform teachers of the situation and the copyright law violation, and then allow them to choose whether or not they want to use the resource based on their own personal comfort level. So I informed teachers and made them aware of the situation. It gives teachers an additional resource that is available to them if they choose to use it. And then it does support Mrs. Lynn as well as Mrs. Evans, who were trying to make this resource available for so many students in their building. All right, our last option here, number 6, inform staff of issue and immediately collect copied materials, communicate to staff of copyright laws, policies, and the current situation, include stakeholders in formulating a fair and equitable plan moving forward, and provide staff with continued education of laws and policies, and then also meet with Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Evans. So pros of this, the information is, again, shared with all the stakeholders, which is very important. It implements copyright law and ensures policies are followed, which is my responsibility as the building leader. It allows for a collaborative effort to address the issue and decreases the legal risk for staff and the school district. So moving forward, trying to make the best choice here and choosing the best option of what I would do if I were the acting principal, if I were Mr. Sample. So I'm going to go with option 6. So immediately collect copied materials. Communicate to staff members of copyright laws, policies, and the current situation. Include all stakeholders in formulating a fair and equitable plan moving forward, and provide staff with continued education of laws and policies. Finally, meeting with Mrs. Evans and Mrs. Lynn and having those conversations of possible consequences and sharing with them how I came to this decision since they're so very involved. So the reason why I chose this option and feel good about this option is because it involves all of the stakeholders. Everyone is affected by this and they need to be part of the plan moving forward. So it's a collaborative effort to make a plan. It keeps honesty and transparency at the forefront by sharing the situation and what happened. The PTA, the superintendent, Board of Education, the software company, the teachers, everyone is involved. And then what we can do is we can discuss the need and the ideas for additional fundraising as well. So I think that would be really important to kind of, we have this problem due to this, and that's why this happened. How can we fix the initial problem of needing additional funding? Next, what it does is it communicates laws and policies to the staff, which is very important. So I wonder how much education has been provided to staff members in this area since this issue did occur. So I would want to make sure that that is done and that it Also, it just includes the staff on that and helps to advocate and create an open and honest relationship. It ensures adherence to copyright law policies, which is my responsibility. It is the most ethical decision. It sets a good example to students and community. So we are responsible for teaching our students about being honest and moral, and ultimately, when it comes to laws, following those laws and what is asked of us. And so we need to make sure that we are doing that ourselves. Walk the walk, talk the talk. It follows the copyright board policy, which I know it wasn't mentioned, but I would imagine that most school boards do have written in their policies something about copyright law. And, that brings me to the next point, is that if it wasn't in the board policy, then we need to make sure that that is being added in. A private conversation with Mrs. Evans and Mrs. Lynn, what that is going to do is it's going to protect their feelings. So I would talk to them separately. And I would want to make sure that I understood where they were coming from and applaud them for what they were ultimately trying to achieve. They were trying to achieve providing these resources for all of their students, and ultimately closing that equity gap that is present because only certain teachers had access to this resource. So I understand where they're coming from. Their heart is in a good place, but ultimately, we have to keep in mind what we are expected to do and to follow, and that includes laws and these copyright laws. Even if someone might not know that this had been done, that still doesn't make it right. And I remember reading about that in some of our research from the copyright assignment that we had in the beginning of the class, and that was quoted. So, and then again, I would share with them whatever consequences were determined by the team together, and whether I'm not sure if there would be, or if it would be a write up, or what that would be. But I would share those consequences with them. And then finally, professional development and continued training for teachers to make sure that we avoid this incident in the future. All right, so implementing the decision. So I have some steps here on how I would implement this decision that I have created for how I would handle this case study. So number one, I would start with alerting the staff just in the most quick and efficient way. So via email, I want to let them know that this is a problem, and I will collect the CDs myself. I will not ask Mrs. Lynn to do that because I think that would be embarrassing for her. So I want to be supportive of her, and so I would be responsible for that and take care of that. Some issues I might run into is that teachers may be reluctant to losing those materials and resources. We might run into some just conflict among the staff members. So already we know that Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon, they were not on the same page. So that conflict does already exist. And again, we might have some parent complaints because one day their child is using this fabulous resource at school and the next day it doesn't exist. So there might be some concern about that. Number two, meet with the superintendent and the school board. So inform them of the situation, and then together we're going to collaborate and devise a plan for fair consequences and the action that needs to be taken. I also would want to talk to them about, why we had this problem, and the problem was there because we need additional funding to provide this resource for all the teachers and students in the building. And then again, working together to create a plan for like ongoing professional development in this area, making sure teachers are receiving that, making sure that it's part of the board policy, making sure it's part of the staff handbook. So just kind of, making sure we're checking all of those things and that they are in place. I thought it might be also helpful to have some kind of like software tracker on devices. So kind of like something that scans your device for viruses. I'm sure there's probably something out there to make sure that there's only one resource being used. So I don't know if that's something that could be put on all of the school district's devices. And then issues I might run into is just the overall questioning of my ability to handle a difficult situation. So if I'm turning to them and asking them for help and guidance and support, are they questioning my leadership skills? And then they also might just overall question, have I communicated with my staff about copyright law? And so that was, that would be something that's important too. Step number 3, meet with Mrs. Evans and Mrs. Lynn individually. So again, I would want to applaud them for being resourceful and passionate and mindful of our budget. And I love where their head was at. But ultimately reminding them of the board policy, copyright laws, and the consequences. And I definitely think there will be some damage done to the relationships there. So I think that's a problem I would run into. Number 4, meet with Mrs. Brandon. So the teacher who initially presented her feelings of and how she was having issue with the copyright of the CDs and that being shared. So I would want to follow up with her because she did come to me. So we would talk about, any other additional concerns or potential issues she had. And then I would want to encourage her that something this big on this broad, this, large of a scale, to approach me first instead of approaching Mrs. Lynn next time, because I think ultimately Mrs. Lynn felt very defensive of her decision to try to do what she thought was going to be best for students. So next time, just encouraging her to talk to me first. All right, so number 5, I'm going to hold a staff meeting and we're going to talk about the situation and then the plan moving forward. So ultimately reminding and educating the staff on copyright laws and policies. I think it would be a good idea to have some kind of, digital tracking sheet, Google Sheet, or some kind of doc that can be shared from the staff that allows me access to know every resource that is being used digitally in our classrooms and who purchased it, where did it come from, and making sure that I'm giving that approval for those resources to be used, and making sure that we're not violating copyright law and policy. So I might run into the problem is that teachers don't have a lot of time. And so, asking them to do one more thing is always a challenge. So they might be reluctant to want to comply to that. In the staff meeting or in, ongoing, just sharing professional development workshop plans. So continuing that education, working on that board policy, and then, moving forward, continuing down the road, I'd really like to allow my staff time to find resources. So if we can't find additional funding, what kind of resources are out there that are free, that are providing similar content that all teachers can use, and we wouldn't run into copyright law issues? How can we create the same opportunity for all students so that we're making sure that we're closing that equity gap? And that could be an ongoing thing that we do always. So number 6, meet with PTA. So they are involved. Mrs. Evans was involved. And so I think it's important that they are informed. Also, the money that was used to purchase the resources came from the PTA. So it is also important that they know that this happened with their funding. So we would share that, apologize, explain the plan of action moving forward to make sure that we prevent this from happening again. And then I think it would be a worthwhile conversation. Do we have additional funding that we can purchase this resource for all the teachers to have? There aren't that many teachers in the building. So is that a cost that we could handle? If not, are there additional fundraising opportunities? So how else can we solve this problem and do it in an ethical and legal way? Number 7, contact the software company. And so this is a hard one and a risky one, because what you're looking at is that this software company could choose to take legal action. However, I feel strongly that it is morally the right thing to do. So sharing what happened and the details with them, apologizing profusely. I think that honesty and that transparency is very important, because again, if they were to later find out that this happened, I think there could be a lot of pretty pretty hard consequences for people involved. So, and then, leading into that discussion of, this came from a good place and my teacher really wanted to do something to support all of our students. If we were to purchase additional license for the software, is there some kind of discount or a bundle or anything that we could do? Are there additional resources that are similar but maybe we have free trials on? So just kind of getting that conversation going and how to problem solve the issue at hand. All right, so plan B. So if I run into a dead end with option number 6, I think ultimately what it led me to was that I would need to just start with the central office admin team and start with the superintendent and the school board, because this is a big problem and the district is liable. And so I think involving them immediately and how to handle the situation would be really important. Having their support and guidance for such a large conflict would be beneficial. And then it's possible that maybe they've had this experience before. Maybe they've dealt with this, the copyright law violations. So it's possible that they could have some really great advice. So that's, if all of those things from option 6 did not work for me, then I think this is where I would start and where I would begin. So, and then there are my resources. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed this assignment. I thought it was really interesting. And overall, the class, I learned a lot. So thank you.